Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's book launch for Resurgence. Portage Moon Press and Highwater Press is located on Treaty 1 territory, as well as the homeland of the Métis Nation. And tonight I get the honor of introducing Niigaanwewidam Sinclair, who is Anishinaabe and a professor at the University of Manitoba, where he holds the Faculty of Arts Professorship in Indigenous Knowledge and Aesthetics and is currently head of the Department of Indigenous Studies. Niigaan is also an award-winning writer, editor, and activist who has been recently named to the Power list of Maclean's magazine as one of the most influential individuals in Canada. In 2018, he won Canadian Columnist of the Year at the National Newspaper Awards for his bi-weekly columns in the Winnipeg Free Press, and is a featured member of the Friday Power panel on CBC's Power and Politics. A former secondary school teacher, he won the 2019 Peace Educator of the Year from the Peace and Justice Studies Association based in Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. He is also an author of Highwater Press This Place, one of the contributors, and he is an acquisition editor for Highwater Press as well. And I am now pleased that my part is over and I get to pass this on to Niigaan.
So bonjour everybody, bonjour ndine mai magaraduk, Niigaanwewidam James Sinclair Omayayan. Bonjour Mishum Masak Nako Masak, Mijana Gijik, Nimiji Nibekwe. It's nice to be here. It's very nice to say Zigwan Agwajing. It's a beautiful day out there. After many, many terrible, terrible days that we've gone through here on Treaty 1 territory out here in Manitoba, we can finally open the window and my cat can finally get some breath of fresh air after being inside for the entirety of this very, very long biboon, this winter that's been very long. So it's a real honor to be here, and it's a real honor to be with two of my very good friends and people I deeply respect and admire, Christine and Katya, who you'll meet in just a minute here. This incredible collection that they've put together, the first of one of many, we hope, to grace classrooms and school districts all across the country. And so wherever you come from, I hope that you have a wonderful night tonight, and I hope that you get to see and pick up this fantastic text and be a part of it. And I know we've got many friends here that are some new and some very long-standing. I see Marjorie is here, and we know that if Marjorie is here, then literally it's a true Winnipeg book launch. Marjorie's been at, I think, every single book launch I've ever been at. So way to go, Marjorie. I see you in the chat there even. So, this wonderful time period in which we're living in is a very interesting and inspiring one. And I can tell you that as an educator, just today, I'm a former school teacher. I'm certainly no longer a teacher like the two wonderful editors of this anthology. But, as a former school teacher, way back in the year 2000 is when I started. And I was one of the very first teachers in the south end of Winnipeg. I was not the first teacher, of course. Incredible people that have set the trail for us. People like Helen Settee and Mary Young and just incredible people that have done this, and people that are still doing it like Myra Laramie, wonderful, amazing educators that are doing great work. And as we walk in their footsteps, we are creating more and more materials for classrooms. Just today, I was working with several dozen teachers that are all across different elements of Winnipeg School Division, all working and looking for resources in which they can incorporate and adapt and adopt Indigenous materials into the classroom. This is a time period in which we are seeing many of the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission being picked up, the calls for justice from the Murder Missing Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry being picked up and enacted, and of course the long-time standing Royal Commission on Aboriginal People going all the way back to 1996, which called for schools in our own languages, which called for everyday teachers in public schools and districts across the country to adopt Indigenous materials and content and pedagogy, but most importantly to hire Indigenous educators. And we're lucky enough to have one here tonight that I First heard about when people were all talking about this new incredible teacher coming up through the system at the University of Winnipeg Collegiate, Christine Emlotz, an Anishinaabe educator and curriculum developer from right here in Winnipeg, Treaty 1 territory. And she's worked in all these different elements, working in children and youth in multiple capacities, so like child welfare, children's disability service, Indigenous family programming. You know, I know Christine also through familial connections. Not that I'm a part of the family, but I kind of feel like I'm a part of the family because they always have family gatherings in my house. So they have Christine's cousin Tara comes into town, and I have a big backyard, and they all come and hang out in my backyard. So I kind of like I'm like an adopted cousin. Is that right, Christine? All right. Well, I want everyone to just please welcome one of the co-editors of this wonderful anthology called Resurgence to the Night Tonight, Christine Emlott. So everybody just give a little round of applause if you can, or a little recognition. You can also have that little button under the reactions to give some applause. Go right ahead to add that. There you go. There's some, oh, and look, and wonderful right there. I can see that Steph's doing some great stuff over there too. I also want you to introduce you to the other editor of this anthology, a very good friend of mine who I met through her graduate work at the University of Manitoba. I was very lucky enough to be an external reader on her master's thesis, and of course now I've been watching very closely her PhD work. Katya Adamov Ferguson is a mother, artist, researcher, teacher, works currently as an early years support teacher in schools throughout Winnipeg, does extensive work in professional development for teachers, and particularly focuses on areas of reconciliation, the TRC calls to action, and of course Indigenous education. Katya has done a tremendous amount of work in the arts to create ethical spaces and mobilize complex topics for children and adults, and her PhD work is on curriculum redesigning and place-based inquiries. So really exciting work that's in art-based research, and we're very excited. But we also know tonight that Katya is currently recovering from an illness, and so is a little bit limited in her ability to speak. So how are you doing over there, Katya? Okay.
I have a voice, so I'm okay.
Okay. I thought you just have to sort of give us some facial images, or maybe write on a post and then post it up on the screen or something for answers, but I'm very glad that you have a voice for tonight. Tonight's wonderful anthology that we have an opportunity to share, I received a copy of it about 24 hours ago, and I have it right here in front of me. It's Resurgence, and you can see right here it's called Resurgence, Engaging with Indigenous Narratives and Cultural Expressions in and Beyond the Classroom. And it is the kind of material, the kind of resource that I dreamt of having as a young Indigenous educator way in the dark days of 2000. We didn't have materials like this. Most of us were making up materials as we went, and most of us who were teaching Indigenous education at the time were working with, in many cases, photocopied materials, spirally bound stuff, sometimes with the Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Center, sometimes with, in the back cage, the back doors of other educators that have done that, and I can remember actually Gary Robertson sharing with me all of his handouts and thinking I had hit the gold mine. But today what you have is incredible resources and materials that have been built on those of the past right here in this fantastic anthology, which features speakers, Indigenous voices, contributions, poetry, art, storytelling, and in an incredible framework that encourages teachers to employ them literally tomorrow. You can take these materials and the education plans that are within these stories and poetry and be able to enact them tomorrow. What I want to do is I want to bring Christine and Katya in here, and I want you to just say a few words about what inspired you to do this book. But I want to read first one little section that really caught my eye in your introduction. This great anthology that you've put in pieces and then how to teach these pieces, and this is the first of a series of many texts called the make sure I get the Footbridge Series. And so what you say in the introduction is that in this book we aim to connect the living curriculum of Resurgence that honors Indigenous centered content and learning processes with classroom and educational practices. As both educators working with Indigenous education in various capacities, what inspired you to do this book, and And maybe, it would be nice too if we heard who were some of your inspirations in your time coming up. So we'll start with Christine.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction, Niigaan. In terms of the inspiration for the book, it all started when Katya and I were approached by Gary Thomas Morse, who's an Indigenous author with Portage and Main Press. And he was really the one that had the idea for this book. And I think he reached out to us because both Katya and I have been working with creating Indigenous resources for the classroom for a number of years. And so he was the one that really got the ball rolling. But for me, my personal inspiration to do this work started as an Indigenous student growing up in Winnipeg's public school system and not really learning anything about my culture. And, I always talk about how the only thing I learned growing up in school about Indigenous people was that we used to live in teepees and use all the parts of the buffalo. And so for me, when I finally read a book by an Indigenous author, that was April Raintree. And I remember reading that in grade 12, and it was a really profound moment for me because, I cried while reading this book and it was so relatable. And so ever since then, I've just been interested in reading as many things as I can by Indigenous authors. And it was really important to me as a teacher to teach about Indigenous topics and to inform students we're still here. And even though many traumatic things have happened, there's also a lot of really beautiful things in our community and brilliance. And that's really what I hope this textbook brings to the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, so many of us with our careers in Indigenous literature in different ways as an English teacher began with that book, April Raintree, Beatrice Mosonier. And of course, Beatrice worked with my dad on that book way back in the 1980s. And I can remember her sitting in the living room. And I remember my dad talking about that book, the courtroom scene in particular, just being so influential to us. I mean, that's so many of us aren't just built by educators and teachers, but also the people in our communities, the people who did the front lines in our communities. And Katya, tell us about what was the inspiration for doing this book. What were some of your inspirations? And maybe what was it like to work with Christine? I'm sure it was just awful. She seems just awful.
Thanks again. I think, as soon as I became a teacher, I knew that there were other ways of doing things that could be more meaningful, that could be more holistic, that could be reaching more students. And so I think when the TRC came out, I shifted kind of what I thought of as what a teacher was. And I really, I think I started to question things. And so I started a journey into my master's thesis on reconciliation. And I think that through that work, I think I just am inspired by Indigenous people that have been doing so many interesting creative works. And so I actually would like to just start by thanking all of the contributors, because I think that although Christine and I have done this work together to edit the collection, it's really the contributors' voices are at the heart of this work. So we are just supporting kind of the structures to engage in classrooms, but I think I would like to celebrate each of them individually and say their names. So Casey Adams, Sonia Ballantyne, Charlene Barehead, Wilson Barehead, Lisa Boyvin, Rita Bouvier, Nicola Campbell, Sarah Florence Davidson, Louise Bernice Haff, Lucy Hemphill, Wanda John Kehuin, Elizabeth LaPonce, Victoria McIntosh, Rihanna Marasti, David Robertson, Christina Lavalley Rudy, and Russell Wallace. So I think through this work, they have been so inspiring, and to receive their works in our inboxes and just to be working with them in an ongoing way and coming back to them with new questions and new insights, I think that's kind of fueled our work in a different way and really inspired us to think really critically and creatively about how can we bring these voices into classrooms in ways that are meaningful, that are critical, that respond to the TRC. So I just really wanted to highlight them right off the hop.
The book is split up into 4 sections, and As you've named off these different really icons, some of them been around for a very long period of time. I know about half of the contributors. Some of them are new voices. Some of them are voices that we've heard a lot from, like, icons like Louise Half, and of course, Rita Bouvier. Rita is just, I think she's one of the unsung heroes of Indigenous poetry in this country. Just the way in which she's been able to do some incredible work. And of course, David Robertson, well known in Manitoba here, and all the different other collaborators, Casey Adams, a lot of really homegrown talent here in Treaty 1. Can we just, this is the first of a series of books that you're building for educators. Christine, can you tell us a little bit about, like, what's your intention with what you've called the Footbridge Series?
Yeah, so this is, like you said, the first of a series. And to start off the first book, we wanted to call it Resurgence, because resurgence, the definition is to rise again to prominence. And that was really the inspiration for this book, is talking about how, the colonial agenda of killing the Indian and the child, for example, was unsuccessful. So, and that's really, a huge component of the book, is talking about not only the trauma, but also the resilience and the beauty, and thinking about the future and what is the future going to hold. And to me, that's the most exciting part. As for the learning framework, we really wanted to create something concrete that teachers can literally read and implement in their classrooms. So moving beyond just theory and into, okay, so what does this actually look like or sound like in the classroom? And so we together developed this learning framework that really starts with reading the piece, and then having that time for personal reflection and sitting and thinking about how does this relate to me, what does this mean to me, and doing that inner work. And then from there, we guide both teachers and students into a process of now connecting this with others and really talking about it with others. And for teachers, that can look like talking about it in a professional learning community of other educators. And with students, that could look like engaging in what we call a learning circle, which is similar to a talking circle. And then we move into, once we have that connecting piece, then we move into the critical literacy. And so we named this section Talking Back. And we ask questions like, what is the author talking back against? Or what forms of oppression is the author talking back against? And from there, the idea is that hopefully there's something in there that that piques students' interest. And we've designed a series of inquiry prompts that students can choose from, so that they are taking responsibility for their own learning and really deciding what they want to inquire into further, and then somehow presenting their learning in a unique way. And that's really the process that we outlined there.
Yeah, it's a pretty remarkable way in which you're working from a beginning and what you call a bridging phase, and then a beyond phase. So, and the different ways that each piece can be taught at this level, at a bridging level, and then a beyond phase, meaning, beyond learning. I really think what you're doing here is a real cutting edge approach to Indigenous education, in that it's more than just what we often refer to as cultural awareness, or sort of talking about the history of the author itself, and then we move on from the text. I mean, what you're talking about here is just personalizing it, thinking about it critically, and then what are you going to do now that you've learned this? And I really love that. And Katya, I want to turn to you here. One of the things that I really like about this is the personal way the way that you've made this book so personal. Like not a lot of academic book or curricular books, or I mean, this bridges so much. This is an anthology, a curriculum, and also a trade pub. I mean, anybody who wants to read some amazing literature, you can get this as well. And then one of the things that I love about this book is that you both write your personal connections or reactions to each piece, so that people can hear like a firsthand voice of what an Indigenous and a non-Indigenous educator is experiencing. Katya, if you don't mind just talking briefly about what is it that you're trying to do here to talk about the collaboration between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, and then how important is that for the classroom?
Well, we really wanted to invite educators to share their perspectives. And so we felt like just saying that wasn't enough, that contributing our voices and our raw kind of reactions to the pieces was helpful to kind of initialize like the circle, I guess. So we're starting to talk about these issues. We invite you now to join us. And so this is really a book that needs to be made sense of with community. This is not something that people should just read and sit and like ruminate on these ideas just on their own. That I think that we make new meaning when we are working in collaboration with people and we are listening to perspectives that are not necessarily the same as our own. And that tension in that is actually productive. And so we were, and it's kind of putting ourselves out in a vulnerable way too, to show that these contributors have shared their stories with us, and now we have a responsibility, and we have to do really careful listening, and there are some ethical considerations when we're dealing with people's stories. And so we felt like to give ourselves you know, for readers to know that we're invested in this work. We are wrestling with certain ideas, certain things. We have visceral reactions to some of the pieces. Some of the, you know, there are varied reactions. So I think that it shows that everyone has a place in this work. It shows that, you know, with that footbridge, that it's a precarious journey, and there will be mistakes that will be made, but I think that we need to have supportive community along the way. And that idea of that footbridge that Christine was talking about, an initial image that was sent to us that we kind of used to guide this work was this Hagwilget footbridge in Hazelton, BC, which was this really like this footbridge high up in the mountains, and it looked like it was just sewn together with sticks and twine, and it was so carefully constructed. And so I think that it shows that this is there's a riskiness in this work, that we're kind of all like Christine said, the internal work needs to happen, but that we're all on different paths on this, and the footbridge framework allows people to enter in, no matter if this is your first engagement with Indigenous perspectives, or you have expertise and are a knowledge keeper yourself and are wrestling with this in different ways. And so I think that everyone has an entry point in this, and that's very important, so that everyone can continue the work and that we can support each other in the work.
Yeah, I mean, like I wish everybody could see the beauty of this book. Like very few books that I mean, like it's curricularly, like it's really well laid out. I feel like I'm doing this is not the great, doesn't do it justice. But like there's these sections where you're doing a lot of connecting between different levels of thinking for educators, and then this the connecting concepts and how to put it into the classroom. But then of course it's so deeply personal as well. I want to ask, maybe this is a good opportunity, and before we get to some questions, I want to invite those in the audience to ask any questions about the book itself. Maybe if each one of you could just point out a piece that you think or that was particularly impactful to you, or maybe a piece that you think is going to be something innovative that educators will maybe hear a voice or hear a story or something that they can use in their classroom. And then what was a piece that really was memorable for you in the many pieces that are within this book? So go ahead, Christine, you go first.
Sure. So all the pieces were amazing, and they're all so memorable.
So diplomatic.
Ways.
So diplomatic. I'm like, pick one piece, and Christine's like, nah, I'll pick them all. Okay.
Well, if I must pick one, I would talk about Rhiannon Morasti's piece, and hers is all about Indigenous architecture. And that's something, to be honest, that was quite new to me. I've never really thought of that as a concept. And her piece is called Indigenizing Spaces. And she talks about how we can think about, and we should be thinking about, how to create spaces like architecture, how to build buildings in a way that flows with the earth rather than interrupts the earth. And so to me, that was just sort of mind-blowing. And it was really interesting to think about, okay, how can we, help educators think about these things in relation to their work? And so that was a challenge. But we ultimately, one of the things that we ask is, how could your school, or how can you think about your actual teaching environment as a building that tells a story, and whose story does it tell? And so to me, that was a really interesting piece. Rihanna also created the cover for the textbook. And so she did such an amazing job at taking our vision and really creating something beautiful. So shout out to Rihanna Marasti.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you're a perfect editor in that I love everybody equally. That's like a true editor, and also, the hours having edited, Manitowabo and through several other books, you just grow to really love everyone associated with the book, and there are different ways in which they operate throughout the world. So it really is like building a family or building a kinship, Katya, was there a piece that you want to point to and say this was one that impacted me? Are you going to choose the Christine, I love everybody equally route, or?
Well, I do have a few, but I think actually I'd like to just state too that something that's unique about this book is that before you engage with each of the chapters, we have a little preface that kind of prepares the reader for the work that's coming ahead. And I think that's something that we kind of are missing sometimes, the opportunity to slow down, think about and prepare yourself emotionally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. What are you going to be engaging with? And how, when you listen to these stories, how are you going to take that with you? And so we've drawn on Dr. Archibald, Joanne Archibald's idea of being story ready and becoming story ready. And she proposes principles like responsibility, respect, reciprocity, and reverence. And so I think that kind of helps to set the stage differently for reading and engaging with these pieces. Joanne Archibald talks about creating an environment that lets the spiritual nature of the story breathe. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, that this is not just like, read this, keep going. We have a responsibility when we're engaging with this work. And so I just wanted to address that, because I think that is something that's unique, and I think will be very helpful for professional learning communities or teacher groups or readers or family book clubs or whatever, to think about what these stories entail, to prepare yourself. If you're going to be using this in the classroom, think about all these things ahead of time before you start working with kids and students in these ways, so that you're not caught off guard, so that you can honor the stories in the best way possible. So I will take a little bit of the approach of Christine, that there are so many pieces and they each spoke to us, I think, very differently. And I think coming back to them over time was very helpful. So like Sarah Florence Davidson's piece stood out to me for the power of sharing within one's own family, and the power that her family took to preserve Haida cultural traditions. And Elizabeth Leponce's piece stood out to me because I don't know anything about video games, and I was like out of my element, but then I went down a rabbit hole online and thought, like, there's so much pedagogical potential there. So I think that also taps into kind of the small C culture that is really relevant to kids too. So I think that'll be an interesting one for people to engage with. And I think lastly, I'd just like to touch on Christina Lavalley-Rudy's piece, because this is actually her piece around ethnomathematics and bead looming has inspired a group of Indigenous educators at Niigaanwewidam School to think about this work and to start taking action steps in the classroom. So it's resonated with me because I'm seeing that this inquiry, because we've been following Christina's work, has actually forged a new kind of community initiative that is really bringing people together and is really, we're working through this work and problem solving, and it's really beautiful things are coming from the wonderful people at Niigaanwewidam School. And so I just wanted to highlight how these pieces can actually and should be transforming our practices, and so they're very inspiring for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, if I can, I mean, I'm a fan of the book, so having seen and like I love David Robertson. I like anything David writes. I mean, he's talking about mental health and reading through mental health, and of course, Casey's from my community, and so I know Casey very well from growing up with her and the family. And but she talks about what's called birch bark technology, which is just wonderful, really, really smart work that's thinking about her work as an artist and then the materiality. But if I can give a shout out to one piece that I think is just so, it's funny, it's sharp, it's incisive, is Sonia Ballantyne's "Why Am I Not on Star Trek?" uh like that piece I was reading over breakfast this morning, and I was like I was like trying to keep my Cheerios because it's such a funny piece, because she talks about how she grew up watching Star Trek and where were the Indians on Star Trek. There was even an episode that in Star Trek: The Next Generation, where the Indians are still being kicked off a planet, and so she said even 200 years from now we're still being removed from our land and that kind of thing. And just really talking about that and what is it that we can imagine, real sharp, incisive thought. We have a question here, but I just wanted to pass on a bunch of congratulations. You're getting huge congratulations in the chat from all different people across the way, and of course our good friend Michael Champagne, who does great educational work, also an author himself. And so if you get a chance to check out Michael's new book. But we have a question here from Michael Herenik, and I'm just going to read it, so I'll paraphrase it the best that I can. Now, Michael is what he refers to as a religious educator, and wants to know, is it really possible for settlers or non-Indigenous peoples to understand Indigenous ways of knowing? And so he's talking about, you can read a little bit more about his question in here around rationalism. But really, I really like the end question here, so I'm going to ask it here. Can educators and students in our schools really comprehend the profound, contemplative, and spiritual way of knowing in Indigenous traditions? Does either one want to try that? Christine, you want to start? Or
Sure, I can jump in. I think that it is a lifelong journey. I don't think it's something that you're going to read any one piece or one book and then all of a sudden, understand the profound, contemplative and spiritual way of knowing. However, I think it's a starting point to understand that there are different ways of knowing and different ways of learning and different perspectives. And that's really the purpose of this book, is to teach all students that, there is this understanding of Indigenous ways of knowing and learning that can be applied to your own teaching practice or learning practice.
it's also important to recognize, Indigenous spirituality is not religion, right? So I mean, we don't have a conversion. You can't convert into Anishinaabe on a Friday at 6 p.m. because you've decided to believe in something or whatever. Or and that's not in any way to say that that's what religion's about. Certainly people would say religion is something that I live and something that I don't convert into either. But to be really specific about Indigenous spirituality, it's about energy, it's about space built through relationships and through kinship. And that's what our ceremonies are. That's why they're so relational. They're not intended to be things that are forced upon people, but that people choose to partake in as an element of community. And so laughter is a good example, or kindness or generosity. There's the spirit of all those things. That's where we get into spirituality, which is why there really is no separation of what we might think of as God, but the Gege Manado is everything. We are part of everything, like a great river. And that we are the best way we could think about it is, it's like being in water. We are both water ourselves, and we are surrounded by water when we're standing in water. That's kind of the way spirit is often thought of. Katya, do you want to take a try at this one, or we're going to get into all spirituality or deep conversations around spirituality?
Well, I don't know the answers to these questions, but I think that I'm always amazed at how generous Indigenous communities that I have been working with have invited me to be part of those ceremonies. And knowing the horrible history, I feel like that is quite an act in itself, to say, you can learn from this experience or this ceremony, or smudge with us, or giving permission to smudge at home. Or, I've been very lucky to be working at a culturally based school where those practices are everyday things. And I think that there's been a nurturing community to not exclude and to kind of pull in. And so I think, you know, I'm making meaning in my own way and trying to find kind of, anyways, there's meaning in it. And I think something that's also a frame that's helpful that Dr. Jeannie Kerr and Amy Parent talk about in their research is the idea of Indigenous learning about Indigenous perspectives or learning from. And I think that there is lots we have to learn from, and so it's not just about the content, but those processes are so there's so much within them, and so much for our holistic aspects of selves, which I don't think that our current settler colonial educational system addresses. And so it's so I don't know, but I know I'm learning from being part of Indigenous communities that are supporting and continuing cultural, spiritual practices, and also inviting settlers to learn from the experience too.
Yeah, and I was working with a bunch of inclusion and pedagogical or clinical workers within Winnipeg School Division, and how all of them I have identified, these are mostly non-Indigenous peoples, they've identified how important it is to consider spirit as a part of both what we call the mind, the body, and the heart, and that you cannot have education without the spirit, because that's what gives meaning to your mind and your body and your heart. And we know our teachings as Anishinaabe, that you can't have that meaning without considering those elements. And so again, we're not talking about religion, we're talking about spirituality, which is something created through relationality or kinship relations. Awesome. We have here a link that's been posted in the chat connecting this book with Leanne Simpson. So, you know, that's quite a big compliment, I'd say, for both of you, is that you have Irene is talking a little bit about connecting this book with some of the land and pedagogy work that Leanne Simpson has been doing. But maybe, you know, Amanda just posted in the chat here around the gift of story and the cover design. I know, Christine, you commented a little bit about this, but maybe can you just talk a little bit about the gift of story related to this particular image?
Yes, and so if you see the textbook, the cover is a bridge, and the bridge symbolizes that journey and how we go through processes, much like how we would walk over a bridge, and we don't ever really get to the other side. It's not something that you're supposed to end with. So like I said, it is very much a lifelong journey, and that is what the cover is meant to symbolize. And then Katya also talked about the original inspiration being a footbridge that people created and traveled on to get to where they needed to go, and to make sure they do it in a safe way. So there's that as well. Katya, did you want to add anything else?
Thanks for that, miigwech, Christine, for that. And miigwech for that question too, because I really like the idea of connecting. You know, so much of our teachings, our traditional writings are symbol based, and they're not representing speech. What they do is represent ideas that lead to speech. And so our traditional writings, our birch bark scrolls, our tattoos, our beadwork, all of those things, those literate things, are requiring our engagement with it, the story to come with the inspiration around the image. And so that's what you've just done here, is talk a little bit about the importance of that image, and done it in a way that represents much of our traditions. So I want to throw it to you, Katya. Here we've got we've actually got a new question here from my good friend iPad. So I think I know that person. So anyways, that's exactly the same idea that I had as you were talking. This would make an incredible contribution to a book club, because it has a group of Indigenous voices. It has personal reflection and what our friend here has said, an inquiry to explore, learn, and understand new ways of knowing and perspectives. Can you think of other venues that this book might belong other than a classroom? A book club is the one that immediately comes to my mind and was pointed out here. Go ahead, Katya.
I really think it's open to anybody. I think at university levels, I think this would be really helpful for pre-service teachers to kind of prepare for some of the work that they might be doing in schools. I think it'd be really interesting to have circles at various levels, like have principals sit together and teachers sit together and then kind of come together, or to have a whole school group, or anybody. I mean, the TRC's calls to actions are very expansive. It's not just for educators. So I think that, you know, if there are other people in areas beyond education, I feel like this work we do present it for students and teachers, but I think if you just substitute it for readers, it can be for anybody. And so I think, and the inclusion of the art and poems, and these are multimodal texts. They're not long, so they're manageable. Many of them are around kind of grade 5 reading level and appropriate for middle years and high school. So I think that it's, and the inclusion of art makes it so accessible. And so I think that we're trying to also find processes that people, so it's not just about the pieces are central, but also like to sit with a group and have a circle where everyone is equal. That might be new for groups of people. So starting and having a book club, you know, like that, versus having, you know, just one dominant voice that is always contributing to the conversation, that might be enough of a shift that shifts the power balance a little bit, and I think that is more productive, and then you hear a diversity of opinions. So I think it's really open. I do hope that adventure is beyond schools, and that's why we did say in the title that it's for the classroom, but also beyond. Yeah.
Yeah, my friend Rochelle Scott, who works with St. James School Division, points out too that the educational assistants would get some good outcomes from this book. Absolutely, because I think oftentimes educational assistants are kind of like, you know, working personally one-on-one with students, and there's direct questions in here that you could ask those students and also ask yourself. And I think that's just, you know, there's so much dynamism within this book itself. We've only got a few minutes left, and we've got great people on this call here, and I'm sure they can reach out and to talk to you a little bit more about the book. Just a reminder to everybody that there is a discount code in the chat, Resurgence 20, which you can order within the next 24 hours. And I'm probably going to guess, you know, if you talk quietly to one of the editors, you could probably figure something out, if it's like a class set, or, you know, something other, like maybe it's for your book club, or maybe you want to give buy 5 copies. I have no doubt whatsoever that if you talk to one of the editors, we can work something out. Portage Main Press is a fantastic press. You all know that I've worked with them a little bit on Manitowabo, and of course This Place, and they do fantastic work in Indigenous education, Indigenous literature, all classroom materials as well, and they have some wonderful trade stuff. But as we end off here, I know this is the first of how many books? What's next for you in this series? And is there work started? Is this gonna be an annual thing? Are you doing this a monthly thing? Is it like a comic book? I'm just joking. I know these things take quite a long time. So Christine, go ahead. What's next? Maybe what's next for the book, and then also just tell me what else you're working on, so that we know what else you're doing.
Sure. So the book took about 2 years to make. So maybe in another 2 years we'll have a second edition. But we do definitely hope to continue this work, and we're already starting to think about the theme for our next book. So this one was Resurgence, of course, and we really left it up to contributors to write about what Resurgence was to them. And so the next book, you know, we're thinking possibly something around land or place would be really important, but that is sort of still in development. We have another panel, a book panel that we're doing on May 26th with Taking It Global's Connected North. So we've invited some contributors to engage in a Q&A with a series of Indigenous and non-Indigenous educators So if anybody is interested in hearing directly from some of the contributors, we invite you to come to that as well. And, I think we're just going to continue to learn, that, like I said, it's a lifelong journey. And we might do some workshops with teachers. Definitely a lot going on.
Great. And was there any contributors here today? I don't want to leave anyone out if I maybe missed out. I went over the chat at the beginning, but was there any contributors that came today? I know that some of them weren't long and far, and I didn't want to miss out anyone. If you feel free to take a look through the chat, Christine, there. If you let me know if I missed anyone. Katya, what's next in this series? We've heard a little bit about, what the plans are maybe for the next book, but what do you hope to get out of this, or what do you hope to for the next few steps? And is this going to be a 322 book series? What's going on here?
Yeah, I think the hope is that people start reading it and talking about it, and the dialogue starts, and the action steps start, and people start looking at these questions, maybe coming back to these pieces. I would love to read this with a group of people. We've been working on this, on our computers and talking it through just together, which I think was a very valuable experience. And I would like to just continue and think about bringing a circle of educators together. And I'd love to engage in this work in a different way and start to bring it into classrooms. And we have some ways to take action. We have lots of questions because we don't have all the answers, but we do have some really tangible, practical ways that people can take this work up. So I'm kind of hoping that somebody would love to to work with me on doing that, and that the school communities where I'm working are interested in engaging with that. So this is, like Christine said, it's an ongoing journey. I don't know how many iterations of this, but I know that there is plans to have more, and I think that there are so many contributors out there that would be very supportive to transforming classroom practices. So we look forward to the next phase.
So Christine's posted in the chat some great ways for educators to connect with each other who are reading the book. And so by using hashtags on things like Twitter, Facebook, I don't know if LinkedIn does any of those things, but I'm just thinking about, feel free to use those hashtags, because what you'll find is, educators across the country are very keen to enact call to action 63.2, which is sharing best practices. That's one of the things the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, called for, was for people working in Indigenous education to share best practices with each other. So by building community, we enact and undo many of those things which we have been taught to do, which is to not talk about Indigenous education, share those things, and then try to build a better country what we've inherited. And so I really appreciate this work tonight. I really appreciate the ones that are picking up this book. And I don't know if you're both seeing, but you're just getting a avalanche of kudos and support and love from the chat. And some people talking about, hey, cousin. So I don't know what's going on over here. They're talking about cousins. We're getting all the kind of stuff over here. So it was like, I'm not sure, Christine, some of your relatives showed up. I'm not sure. Actually, I think I saw Tara in here. So really nice to see everyone. Oh, there she is, of course, all the way from Victoria. So it's great to see everybody here. And a big miigwech to you for inviting me to be a very small part of this launch. It's an honor for me to, not only get to spend time with both of you. I see you both in different sections of my career and different sections of the travels that I take, but just being a part of this incredible achievement. Birthing out a book is like, Richard Van Camp says it's like shooting out an arrow into the sky. You don't know how it's going to influence or who it's going to impact, but that when the world sees this wonderful thing, it's this wonderful, beautiful thing flying throughout the sky. And so that's what we see right now, is this text that's headed out. So big miigwech to you both, and thanks so much. You can pick this book up from Portage and Main Press. And you can, again, here it is right here. discount codes for the next 24 hours. I'm going to, is there anything else that I wanted to, that I missed out on or that you'd like to add, Christine or Katya?
No, just a big thank you to everyone for taking the time tonight to spend an hour with us and learn more about the book. And we definitely hope you stay connected. We're interested in learning about how you are going about your journey. And so make sure to use those hashtags and follow us on social media. And yeah, we'd love to stay connected. So miigwech, thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, well, miigwech to both of you, and huge thanks to Kirsten. I'm going to bring Kirsten back in here. Kirsten from Portage in Maine, which I'm sure that, I hope you don't, oh, there you go, you're frozen again. That seems to be the theme of the night, is Kirsten's screen free. Let's just all look at Kirsten's frozen face there. Let's just all look at that. She's going to be so embarrassed when she sees the recording. So I will take her off the screen there. But a big miigwech to everybody for coming tonight. Wonderful night, and please pick up this book as soon as you can. Miigwech, everyone. Take care of yourselves and be safe. Be safe during this horrible sickness, and take care of each other in the best way possible. So miigwech, everybody.